Seems to think that if it's going to probably going to be a big fuse or a big relay, which I think is going to be inside that. But before we start, we might as well. One of the fuses had completely melted into the actual fuse box, and it looks like it had even caused damage to.
In a shocking twist that has caught the attention of the entire automotive world, Mark McCann was reportedly told that fixing the gearbox's Bugatti Veyron could cost around $300,000, a number so high that it instantly made the situation feel almost hopeless. For most people, that kind of money is not just expensive, it is life-changing. It creates pressure, stress, and in some cases, forces difficult decisions like selling or even giving up on a car completely. This is exactly why the story became even more unbelievable when Matt Armstrong entered the picture and approached a very similar problem in a completely different way. Instead of accepting the idea that the gearbox needed a full replacement, Matt decided to investigate the issue step by step, using logic, patience, and a hands-on approach. What he discovered would go on to surprise millions of people. The same type of gearbox issue that was expected to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars was actually caused by something incredibly small, a simple fuse. Yes, a tiny electrical component that costs only a few dollars, easily available from Halfords, turned out to be the key to solving a problem that many believe required a complete gearbox replacement. This moment did not just fix a car. It raised serious questions about how such problems are diagnosed and handled, especially when it comes to high-end manufacturers like Bugatti. As Matt began working on the car, he did not assume the worst. Instead, he focused on understanding how the system worked. The gearbox in a Bugatti Veyron depends heavily on pressure systems controlled by pumps and electronics. If the pump does not work, the gearbox cannot build pressure, and without pressure, the car cannot shift gears properly. This can easily make it seem like the entire gearbox has failed, when in reality, the issue might be somewhere much smaller in the system. To explore this, Matt used diagnostic tools to communicate with the car's onboard computer. Interestingly, the system showed that certain components, like the gearbox pump, were working. But physically, there was no sound, no movement, nothing to confirm that the pump was actually running. This created a strange situation where the car believed everything was fine, but in reality, something was clearly wrong. This gap between digital feedback and physical reality became the most important clue. Instead of jumping straight to expensive conclusions, Matt continued checking basic components. He moved toward the fuse box, an area often ignored in such high-end cars because people assume problems must be more complex. Without a clear fuse diagram, he carefully checked each fuse one by one. Most of them were fine, but then he found something that immediately stood out. One fuse was completely damaged, and more importantly, it was not the correct type. It was a 40-amp fuse placed in a position where a lower rating was likely required. This raised serious concerns because fuses are designed as safety devices. They are meant to break when too much current flows through a circuit, protecting the system from damage or even fire. By installing a high-rated fuse, that safety is removed. It suggested that someone in the past may have faced repeated fuse failures, and instead of fixing the real issue, simply use a stronger fuse to stop it from blowing again. This decision may have seemed like a quick solution at the time, but it ultimately caused a bigger problem. The fuse had melted and stopped doing its job, cutting off power to critical components like the gearbox pump. What looked like a massive and expensive mechanical failure was now starting to look like a simple electrical issue, and this realization marked the beginning of discovery that would challenge everything people believed about such high-cost repairs. After discovering the damage and incorrect fuse, Matt Armstrong knew he was getting closer to the real problem, but he still needed proof before making any big claims. At this stage, the situation was both exciting and risky, because if the issue truly was just electrical, then fixing it would completely change the story. But if not, the expensive gearbox replacement could still be unavoidable. Instead of guessing, Matt and his team decided to test the system carefully. They first removed the damaged fuse completely because it was no longer acting like a proper fuse. It had essentially turned into a burnt piece of metal that could allow uncontrolled power flow, which is dangerous in any car, especially in a complex machine like the Bugatti Veyron. To avoid causing more damage, they use a controlled method by supplying power manually to the system. This allowed them to observe what components would respond without risking further electrical issues. The moment they connected power and opened the car door, something incredible happened. For the first time since Matt had bought the car, they could actually hear the gearbox pump running. This was a huge breakthrough because it confirmed that the pump itself was not broken. The expensive mechanical part that many believed had failed was actually working all along. However, there was still a small issue. The pump kept running continuously instead of stopping after building pressure, which is what it is supposed to do. This indicated that while the system was now receiving power, it was not yet behaving perfectly. At this point, Matt made a simple but crucial decision. Instead of using another incorrect fuse, he installed a proper 20-amp fuse, which is likely the correct rating for that circuit. This small change made all the difference. When they tested the system again, the pump started, built pressure, and then stopped exactly as it should. This was the moment everything changed. The system was now behaving normally, and the gearbox had the pressure it needed to operate correctly. To confirm the fix, Matt got into the driver's seat and attempted to shift the car out of park. Previously, the gearbox would not respond at all, making the car feel completely broken. But this time, the gear selector moved smoothly into neutral. This simple action confirmed that the gearbox was now functioning. He continued testing by shifting through all the gears, park, reverse, neutral, and drive, and each one engaged properly without any issues. But Matt did not stop there. He wanted to be absolutely sure that the gearbox would work under real conditions, not just while the car was stationary. So, he placed the car on a ramp and tested whether the wheels would move when the car was put into gear. As he shifted into drive, all four wheels began to rotate, showing that power was being delivered correctly. This was the final confirmation that the gearbox was fully operational. The problem that was believed to require a $300,000 replacement had been solved with a simple fuse that cost only a few dollars from Halford's. This moment was not just about fixing a car. It completely changed the narrative around the issue. It showed that sometimes, even in the most advanced machines, problems can come from the smallest and simplest components. It also highlighted the importance of proper diagnosis instead of jumping directly to the most expensive solution. What made this even more powerful was the speed of the fix. The entire process, from identifying the issue to solving it, took only a few hours. This stands in complete contrast to the idea of replacing an entire gearbox, which would take weeks and cost an unbelievable amount of money. As the reality of what just happened began to sink in, it became clear that this was not just a repair story. It was something much bigger, something that would spark discussions, debates, and even criticism across the entire automotive community. As soon as Matt Armstrong revealed that the gearbox issue on his Bugatti Veyron had been fixed with something as simple as a fuse, the reaction across the internet was immediate and intense. The automotive community, especially fans of high-end hypercars, could hardly believe what they were seeing. For years, cars like the Veyron have been treated as machines that only manufacturers like Bugatti fully understand, and that any serious problem will require expert intervention, specialized tools, and extremely expensive parts. But this moment challenged that belief in a very direct way. The comment sections on Matt's video quickly filled with reactions ranging from shock and excitement to anger and disbelief. Many people started comparing the situation to the case of Mark McCann, who had been told that a gearbox issue could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. The contrast between a $300,000 estimate and a simple fuse replacement created a powerful narrative that spread quickly across social media platforms. Some viewers even imagined how frustrating this must feel for previous owners who may have faced similar issues and either paid huge amounts of money or given up on their cars completely. One of the most common reactions was disbelief at how something so small could cause such a big problem. People began to question how many other expensive repairs might actually be linked to simple electrical faults rather than major mechanical failures. This idea alone was enough to spark widespread discussion. At the same time, many comments took a more humorous approach, joking about how mate Rimac might react to seeing yet another Bugatti problem being solved outside of official channels. While these comments were often exaggerated for entertainment, they reflected a deeper feeling among viewers that traditional repair systems for hypercars might not always be as transparent or straightforward as they seem. However, it is important to understand that situations like this are not always as simple as they appear. High-performance cars like the Bugatti Veyron are incredibly complex machines, designed with extreme precision and built to handle very high levels of stress and performance. Manufacturers often use strict repair policies to ensure safety, reliability, and consistency. From their perspective, replacing entire components instead of repairing individual parts can reduce risk and guarantee that the car performs exactly as intended. This is especially important when dealing with systems that operate under high pressure and temperature, where even a small failure could lead to serious consequences. But at the same time, Matt's discovery highlights an important point about diagnosis. If a problem is not properly understood, it can easily be misinterpreted as something much bigger than it actually is. In this case, a lack of power to the gearbox pump made it seem like the gearbox itself had failed, when in reality, the mechanical components were still in working condition. This shows how critical it is to check even the simplest parts before assuming the worst. The situation also raises interesting questions about how modern cars are designed and repaired. As vehicles become more advanced, they rely more on electronics, sensors, and software systems. This increases performance and efficiency, but it also creates new challenges when something goes wrong. A small electrical fault can sometimes create symptoms that look like major mechanical issues, making diagnosis more complicated. For viewers, this story was not just entertaining. It was also educational. It showed that understanding how systems work, even at a basic level, can make a huge difference. And while not every problem will have such a simple solution, this case serves as a reminder that sometimes the answer is much closer and much simpler than expected. As the story continued to spread, it started to go beyond just a simple repair and turn into a much bigger discussion about how hypercars are diagnosed and maintained. What Matt Armstrong showed with his Bugatti Veyron was not just a lucky fix, but a different way of thinking. Instead of immediately accepting that a major component had failed, he focused on understanding the system step by step, starting from the simplest possibilities. This approach may sound basic, but in the world of high-end cars, it is often overlooked because of how complex these machines are. Many people assume that if something goes wrong in a hypercar built by Bugatti, the solution must also be extremely complex and expensive. But this situation showed that even the most advanced cars still rely on small and simple components working correctly together. When one of those small parts fails, it can create symptoms that look much more serious than they really are. This is exactly what happened with the gearbox pump system. Without power, the pump could not build pressure, and without pressure, the gearbox could not function. From the outside, this looked like a complete gearbox failure. But in reality, the mechanical system was still intact. This raises an important point about how modern vehicles are designed. Today's cars depend heavily on electronics, sensors, and software. These systems are incredibly powerful and allow cars to perform at very high levels, but they also add layers of complexity when it comes to troubleshooting. A simple electrical issue, like a blown fuse or a faulty relay, can stop an entire system from working, even if all the major components are perfectly fine. For someone who does not have access to detailed diagnostic tools or technical knowledge, it can be very difficult to identify the real cause of the problem. This is one reason why manufacturers often recommend replacing complete units instead of repairing individual parts. It reduces the risk of missing something and ensures that the car returns to its original performance standards. However, it also means that smaller issues might sometimes lead to much larger and more expensive solutions than necessary. The case of Mark McCann adds another layer to this discussion. When someone is told that a repair will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, it can completely change how they see the situation. It creates pressure and can lead to decisions like selling the car or stopping the project altogether. But if the root cause turns out to be something simple, it raises questions about how these diagnoses are made in the first place. At the same time, it is important to stay balanced and realistic. Not every gearbox problem will be caused by a fuse, and not every expensive repair is unnecessary. Hypercars operate under extreme conditions, and their parts are designed to handle very high levels of stress. When something truly fails inside a gearbox, it can be incredibly expensive to fix, and in some cases, replacing the entire unit might be the safest and most reliable option. What makes this story powerful is not that it proves all expensive repairs are wrong, but that it highlights the importance of proper diagnosis. It shows that even in the most advanced machines, starting with basic checks can sometimes reveal surprising results. For many viewers, this was a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, still depends on simple principles. Electricity must flow, components must receive power, and systems must communicate correctly. When any of these basic elements fail, the entire system can stop working. And sometimes, fixing that failure does not require a massive budget, but just careful thinking, patience, and a willingness to question assumptions. As more people began to understand what had actually happened, the story started to take on a deeper meaning, especially when comparing the experiences of Mark McCann and Matt Armstrong. On one side, you have a situation where a gearbox issue is seen as a massive financial problem, potentially costing around $300,000, creating stress and uncertainty for the owner. On the other side, you have a hands-on investigation that leads to a solution costing just a few dollars, using a simple fuse from Halfords. This contrast is what made the story so powerful and widely discussed. It highlights how different approaches to the same type of problem can lead to completely different outcomes. For many viewers, this raised an important question. How many other cases exist where a small issue is mistaken for a major failure? While it would be incorrect to assume that this happens all the time, the possibility alone is enough to make people think more carefully about how problems are diagnosed, especially in highly complex machines like the Bugatti Veyron. At the same time, this situation also shows the value of knowledge and experience. Matt did not just randomly find the problem. He followed a logical process, testing each part of the system step by step. He used diagnostic tools, observed how the car responded, and paid attention to the difference between what the computer was reporting and what was actually happening physically. This careful approach allowed him to narrow down the issue and eventually discover the faulty fuse. It is a reminder that even though modern cars are full of advanced technology, the basic principles of troubleshooting still apply. You start with simple checks, eliminate possibilities, and move step by step toward the root cause. Another important point in this story is the role of previous repairs or modifications. The presence of 40-amp fuse where a lower-rated fuse should have been suggests that someone had already tried to fix the problem before, but did not address the real cause. Instead of solving the issue, they may have created a more dangerous situation by removing the safety protection that the fuse provides. This shows how quick fixes can sometimes lead to bigger problems in the future. It also highlights the importance of using the correct parts and following proper procedures, especially in high-performance cars where systems are carefully designed to work within specific limits. As the discussion continued, some people began to question the policies used by manufacturers like Bugatti when it comes to repairs. Why replace an entire gearbox if the issue might be something small? Why not investigate further before recommending such an expensive solution? These are valid questions, but they do not always have simple answers. Manufacturers have to consider many factors, including safety, reliability, warranty, and the ability to guarantee performance. Replacing a complete unit ensures that all components are working as intended, but it also increases the cost significantly. What this story really shows is a gap between different approaches to problem solving. On one side, there's a system designed to minimize risk and maintain high standards, even if it means higher costs. On the other side, there's a more flexible and investigative approach that focuses on finding the exact cause of a problem, even if it takes more time and effort. Neither approach is completely right or wrong, but this situation clearly demonstrates the benefits of taking the time to understand a problem before deciding on a solution. As this story continued to gain attention, it also began to highlight a bigger shift happening in the automotive world, where independent creators like Matt Armstrong are changing how people think about car repairs, especially for high-end machines like the Bugatti Veyron. In the past, cars of this level were seen as completely untouchable unless you had direct access to the manufacturer, such as Bugatti or highly specialized technicians trained by them. The idea that someone could buy a damaged hypercar, bring it into a normal workshop, and fix it step by step, while documenting the entire process was almost unheard of. But today, platforms like YouTube have changed everything. People are no longer just watching finished results. They are seeing the full journey, including the problems, mistakes, and solutions. This transparency is what makes stories like this so powerful. When viewers watch Matt diagnose the issue, check the fuses, and finally fix the gearbox with a simple component, It did not feel like a hidden or mysterious process. It felt real, understandable, and even inspiring. Many people began to feel that if someone takes the time to learn and investigate, even very complex systems can be understood at a basic level. Of course, this does not mean that everyone can or should attempt to repair a hypercar on their own, but it does change the perception that these cars are completely impossible to work on. Another important aspect of this shift is trust. Traditionally, people rely heavily on manufacturers and official service centers because they are seen as the most reliable source of information and repair. But when a situation like this appears, where a very expensive problem turns out to have a simple solution, it naturally makes people question how much they really understand about the repair process. This does not mean that manufacturers are wrong or dishonest, but it shows that there can sometimes be a gap between official procedures and real-world situations. For example, replacing an entire gearbox may be the safest and most guaranteed way to fix a problem, but it may not always be the most efficient or cost-effective solution. Independent creators often have the freedom to explore alternatives, test different ideas, and take risks that official service centers cannot. This freedom allows them to discover solutions that might otherwise remain hidden. However, it is also important to understand the risks involved. Working on a car like the Bugatti Veyron requires skill, knowledge, and experience. One wrong step could cause serious damage or even create safety issues. Matt's success in this case is not just about luck. It is a result of years of experience working on complex vehicles and understanding how systems interact with each other. As more people watch these kind of projects, it may encourage a new generation of enthusiasts to learn more about how cars work, rather than relying entirely on others. It also puts some pressure on manufacturers to be more open about their systems and repair processes. While companies like Bugatti will always focus on maintaining the highest standards of safety and performance, they may also need to consider how transparency and communication can improve trust with their customers. In the end, this story is not just about a fuse or a gearbox. It is about how knowledge, curiosity, and a willingness to question assumptions can lead to unexpected results. By this point, the story had clearly moved far beyond a simple repair and started to influence how people think about ownership risk and decision-making when it comes to hypercars like the Bugatti Veyron. For someone like Mark McCann, being told that a gearbox issue could cost around $300,000 is not just a technical problem. It becomes a financial and emotional challenge. When faced with such a high repair cost, many owners would naturally feel overwhelmed. They might question whether the car is worth fixing, whether they should sell it, or whether continuing the project makes any sense at all. In some cases, this kind of situation can even lead to cars being abandoned, sold at a loss, or repossessed because the owner believed the repair is simply too expensive to handle. But what Matt Armstrong demonstrated with his approach creates a completely different perspective. By taking the time to properly investigate the issue, he showed that the first diagnosis is not always the final answer. This does not mean that every expensive repair is wrong, but it does suggest that there can sometimes be more to the story. For owners, this highlights the importance of asking questions, seeking second opinions, and understanding at least the basic principles of how their car works. Even if they do not plan to fix the car themselves, having that knowledge can help them make better decisions. Another important factor in this discussion is the role of uncertainty. When a car shows symptoms like a non-functioning gearbox, it is easy to assume the worst because the visible signs point to a major failure. The car will not move, the gears will not engage, and everything feels completely broken. But as this case shows, those symptoms can sometimes be misleading. A lack of electrical power to a key component can create the same effect as a complete mechanical failure. This makes diagnosis one of the most critical parts of any repair process. Without accurate diagnosis, even experienced professionals can recommend solutions that are much larger than necessary. At the same time, it is important to remain realistic. Hypercars like the Bugatti Veyron are still incredibly complex and expensive machines. There will always be situations where repairs truly are costly and unavoidable. Internal gearbox damage, worn components, or structural issues cannot be fixed with a simple fuse. These cars are built to operate under extreme conditions,